In the remote wilderness of Alaska, there's an annual gathering of animals which is so enormous, it seems at times that the land itself is on the move. Caribou represent the very spirit of the frozen north. Every year, the vast herds make an epic journey to the tundra and back, a round trip hundreds of miles long. On the way, they face hardships and dangers which will take their toll, but the majority will survive, for nature dictates that the caribou will always return. "32 herds of caribou roam the far north of Canada and Alaska. At just under 500,000 strong, the Western Arctic herd is Alaska's largest, ranging over the entire northwest corner of this huge wilderness state. During the winter, temperatures here plummet to -60 degrees Fahrenheit. The name caribou comes from the Indian name Jalibou, meaning the ones which paw the ground in search of food. This is Kulavak. Kulavak is an Eskimo term for a female caribou which has reached breeding age. She's one of thousands of pregnant females in the Western Arctic herd, which will give birth in the spring. The caribou's thick coat insulates it from the winter cold. Even its muzzle is fur-lined for added protection. The caribou is the only species of deer in which both males and females have antlers. In winter, with many animals crowding together, the females use their antlers to compete for the best feeding sites. Squabbles for dominance mean they often lose or break them before the normal shedding time. Kulavak is only in her 3rd year and is still low-ranking. Caribou live for up to 12 years, but old females sometimes reach 15. Caribou always spend the winter months below the tree line, usually in the shelter of the coniferous forests. Here, the trees offer them some protection from the bitterly cold winds. But the forests are also home to the caribou's principal natural enemy, the wolf. Wolves have a high rate of failure when hunting. They add to their winter diet by scavenging when the chance arises. The frozen carcass of a caribou also provides a winter food supply for smaller predators like the weasel. A caribou will keep both the weasel and the wolf from starving for several weeks. The beginning of February marks the first signs of approaching spring. The caribou's instincts are triggered by the lengthening daylight. As they start to head northwards, their wide splayed hooves enable them to travel easily over the snow. The land will remain frozen for several months to come. Kulavak searches for food, poking her muzzle deep into the snow where she can smell the scant grasses and lichens which form her winter diet. Because they're so poor in nutrients, the caribou need to eat large quantities each day. They use their sharp hooves to dig craters in the snow to uncover buried plants. The pregnant females are always the first to start out on their journey. They leave their wintering grounds east of Alaska's Seward Peninsula on a journey that will take them to the Arctic tundra hundreds of miles to the north before they give birth. So they must start out before winter has fully relinquished its grip on the land. As the long trek gets underway, small groups of caribou, nearly all of them females, join together to form larger herds united by a common purpose. Though their migration patterns fluctuate each year, the caribou's broad direction of travel remains the same. As they cross the Selawik Flats, a vast wetland stretching inland from the coast, a slow thaw has already started. If Kulavak or any of her companions fall through the ice, it could be fatal. But the caribou sense where the ice is thickest, and they carefully pick their way to safety. As winter recedes, grizzly bears start to emerge from their dens. The wolves bark in alarm, but the bear is still drowsy from hibernation. As the days grow longer, the caribou's urge to travel grows stronger. Beyond the Selawik Flats lies their first major obstacle. The Kobuk River snakes its way to the Arctic Ocean on Alaska's west coast. The caribou must negotiate the river, for there's no way round. Sometimes the herds can cross while it's still frozen, but this year the thaw has come early. The breakup of the ice is already underway. Fed by melted water, the river has turned into a swollen torrent. It spells death to any caribou which becomes trapped among the jumble of floating ice. But some of the herds are reluctant to wait until the ice is cleared. Instead, they plunge straight in. Caribou are strong swimmers, but the water is only just above freezing. Kulavak can't afford to lose her way among the floating ice. Others struggle out to rest on the floes, then get carried away downstream to an uncertain fate. Kulavak and her group have made a safe crossing. But each spring, the rivers claim lives as the caribou herds battle their way across them. The pregnant cows which begin the journey first meet the rivers at their worst, and if they perish, their unborn calves die with them. Within a few days, the breakup of the ice is complete and the flows drift away downstream. Not all of the herds reach the river at the same time. The later arrivals find the Kobuk River in a seemingly more friendly mood. but appearances can be deceptive. On the north bank, thick ice still hugs the shore, proving an impenetrable barrier for the swimming animals. The caribou's thick coat traps the air and helps to keep it buoyant, as well as insulating it from temperatures which would kill a human in minutes. But even caribou can't remain swimming in the freezing water indefinitely. If they don't find a way out soon, disaster could strike the whole herd. One has spotted a gap in the ice. Now she presses forward and the others follow her lead. At this time of year, more and more caribou are crossing the river almost daily. The majority make it safely to the northern shore. The caribou aren't the only ones heading northwards. In early April, sandhill cranes are also traveling to their breeding grounds on the tundra. But the caribou have a more difficult journey over the steep and rugged terrain ahead of them as they trek relentlessly onwards. After fording the icy Kobuk River, the herds must now face mountain ranges which stretch right across their route north. Undeterred, the caribou begin to climb the slopes and file along the high ridges as they've done each year from time immemorial. Kulavak's route has taken her high into the mountains. The summits are still bitterly cold in early spring, though the caribou can take them in their stride. Food is scarce here too. Kulavak nibbles hungrily. But the female caribou cannot afford to stop for too long if they are to reach their calving grounds in time to give birth. Despite their hardiness, They would rather avoid the icy winds which blow over the summits wherever they can. The herds prefer to travel the sheltered valleys and slopes where there is more to eat. But there are dangers here, too. The wolves are following the scent trail of an injured caribou. When the herds run, it may reveal itself. Once the wolves have killed, the caribou know that for the moment, they are no longer a threat. The pregnant caribou continue their northbound trek through the mountains, which are home to other species too. The willow ptarmigan survives on the high tops all the year round. But the red fox prefers the lower slopes during the coldest months. Moose also favor the sheltered valleys and lower mountainsides. Unlike caribou, which are essentially grazers, moose are browsers. In spring, they move on to more open ground to feed on willows, which a few weeks ago were still buried under the snow. Wherever the caribou go on their journeys, they leave their mark. On difficult ground, each animal follows in the footsteps of the one in front, carving deep trails across the mountainsides. These paths may be used by many successive generations of caribou. Eventually, they become permanently etched into the landscape. The high slopes and mountaintops are also the home of a remarkable creature which is well adapted to these extreme conditions. Musk oxen are native to Alaska, but were exterminated at the end of the 19th century. Now they've been reintroduced and are expanding their range again. A single wolf is no match for an adult musk ox, but the newborn calves are more vulnerable, though the adults are very protective of them. The musk oxen's best defense against predators is in a circular wall of tight bodies and sharp horns. Bears or wolves are unable to break through the ring to prey on the calves. The caribou's long trek over the mountains is finally coming to an end. On the other side, they must cross another big river, though by the time they reach the Noatak, it's usually free of ice. But it's still treacherous, and the water is severely cold. 150 miles to the south, a second wave of caribou are just starting their journey. Unlike the pregnant females, the bulls, barren cows, and yearlings can afford to wait until the spring thaw is well underway. It's now early May, and in the southern part of the caribou's range, wolves are starting to give birth to their pups. A female wolf usually has between 2 and 5 offspring. As each pup is born, she cleans it and then chews through the umbilical cord. Far to the north, the Alaskan winter is still in retreat. The caribou are now crossing the western end of the Brooks Range, the final barrier before their calving grounds on the shores of the Utacock River. It's important that they reach familiar territory before they give birth if their calves are to have the best chance of surviving. The females begin to shed their antlers now. They have no need of them as food becomes more available. For some cows, labor is already approaching. The western Arctic herd usually calves on the north slope, the flat, featureless tundra below the Brooks mountain range. Kulavak has already shed her antlers. Now she's giving birth to her first calf. Within minutes, the calf is struggling to its feet. Though this is her first, Kulavak's maternal behavior is stimulated by the birth, and she immediately becomes an attentive mother. All over the tundra, the caribou herds are giving birth. It's now late May, and over 90% of the calves are usually produced within one period of a week or so. A newborn calf weighs about 13 pounds. It can walk within the hour and outrun a man within a day. Calves soon start to eat solid food, but still depend on their mother's rich, fatty milk for several weeks. In early June, the tundra bursts into bloom. Pollen from flowers is a rich source of nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients ingested by the calf through its mother's milk supply. Within a few hours of birth, Kulavak's calf can already keep up with her. On a plentiful supply of milk, the calves double their weight within 10 days. Soon they are strong enough to join the migration which continues after they are born. Each year, some calves arrive after the main calving period. A young caribou needs as much time as possible to develop before facing the rigors of winter. Even the loss of just a few days' growth could make a critical difference to a calf's eventual chances of survival. The snow and ice on the tundra have melted, leaving the land crossed by icy waterways. Although the calves are hardy and strong on their legs, fording rivers swollen with melting ice can be dangerous for them. Their mothers choose the shallowest crossing places where possible. Kulevak doesn't have the experience of the older cows. She leads her calf into deep water where it has to struggle against the strong current. After its swim, the calf is too exhausted to climb the bank. Kulevak waits nearby, but she's powerless to help her calf. On the far bank is a female grizzly and her cubs. The sow bear knows young caribou are sometimes easy to catch at the rivers if they get into difficulty while crossing. Below the bank, the calf is hidden from Kulevak's sight. Momentarily confused, she returns to the herd. Without her, the calf has no chance of surviving. The bear's eyesight is poor, and they failed to catch the calf's scent. But even if it successfully climbs the riverbank, it has little chance of finding its mother again among the herds. But the contact calls between a mother caribou and her calf form a vital link. Recognizing the sound of her own young, Kulevak leaves the herd again to find it. Mother and calf are finally reunited, a more fortunate outcome than many. Meanwhile, in the river, another calf has lost its mother. No other female will respond to its calls, but if the bears hear it, they will quickly end its search. Every spring, some young calves are drowned, but a mother caribou's loss is often another animal's gain. These tragic victims of the spring floods benefit the species which scavenge on them, including both bears and wolves. As the caribou continue their journey, they pass through the territories of many wolf packs. Wolves are cooperative hunters. While only the top-ranking pair in the pack normally breed, the others help to provide food for the growing pups. A dead caribou calf is a bonus for the wolves, since they didn't have to expend any energy catching it. At the den, a family of 5-week-old pups greet their mother. She may stay behind while the rest of the pack go hunting as far as 50 miles away. In between feeding times, the wolf pups rest and play, at the den site. The young wolves are beginning to explore their surroundings too, but they only leave the immediate vicinity of the den under the watchful eye of their mother. By the end of June, the snow has receded from all but a few patches on the tops of the mountains. The brief Arctic summer has arrived. The tundra is now covered with a sudden, lush growth of tender food plants. This is one of the magnets which draw the caribou so far north each year, for it provides them with the chance to replenish their bodies with food rich in nutrients. The ptarmigan are now in summer plumage. Dust bathing probably helps to keep the feathers in good condition and rid them of parasites. With the coming of summer, the tundra erupts with insect life. The waterlogged land is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. In July, millions of them emerge to plague the herds. The caribou's growing antlers are covered in thin skin which carries a blood supply readily tapped by the hordes of mosquitoes. Caribou are also pestered by other insects, such as warble flies, which lay their eggs on the skin of their hosts, and botfly larvae, which develop in their nostrils. To avoid these attacks, they crowd together in densely packed masses. Warble flies normally target the legs first, so the caribou bunch more closely to protect themselves. In July, huge aggregations join together for several weeks as the bulls and non-breeders which left the wintering grounds last finally catch up with the herds of females and calves. Male and female, young and old, these herds now stretch for miles across the tundra. Persecuted by insects, the caribou often get little chance to feed, and they sometimes launch into a desperate stampede to evade their tormentors. At this time of year, adult caribou can each lose up to 2 pints of blood a week to blood-sucking parasites. Eventually, they are forced to retreat from the tundra and make for higher ground. Turning back toward the foothills of the Brooks Range, they set their heads toward the cool mountain passes where the wind keeps the insects at bay, and they will have more opportunity to forage. Even in the mountains, the caribou aren't completely free from attack, so they congregate on snow patches where it's too cold for mosquitoes. In summer, the lower slopes and valleys of the mountains are covered in a dense growth of dwarf willow. These shrub forests provide the caribou with excellent forage. But the thick willow scrub also obscures their view. Though a grizzly is normally too slow to catch a healthy caribou out in the open, in these surroundings it might have more luck. The caribou have already scented the bear. There's no chance of an easy meal now. During July and August, the herds grow fat on the rich forage. Kulavak and her calf are with a group of mature males. Bull caribou normally shed their antlers in December. By late summer, their new sets are almost full grown. At 6 weeks old, the calf is well grown and has gradually stopped suckling from its mother. The herds are shedding the remnants of their previous winter coats. The old bleached hair falls out. The new short coat underneath will grow to form next winter's protection. Even in summer, wolves follow the herds. During this season, the caribou are more relaxed, and even a single wolf has a chance at a kill. Once the element of surprise is lost, so is the wolf's likelihood of success. The Arctic summer is brief. By late August, the first cold spells quickly kill off the insects. They also herald the arrival of autumn. A rough-legged hawk hunts for small mammals, but in a few weeks' time, the ground here will be covered in snow again, and the hawk will move south. Though the caribou are now free from the attacks of insects, they've little time left to feed peacefully. Their journey begins again as they start to retrace their steps back toward their wintering grounds far to the south. The first blizzards will soon sweep through the mountains, and the herds must leave here before they become trapped by snowdrifts. The autumn migration is more leisurely than the journey in spring. In September, the herds browse almost constantly. Food will not be as plentiful again until early next summer. The bulls are already starting to shed the skin covering or velvet from their antlers. As the blood supply dries up, the skin shrivels and peels off in strips, a process helped by the caribou themselves, rubbing their itching headgear on trees and bushes. Bull caribou grow the largest antlers of all deer for their body weight. The annual reproduction of this huge amount of bone is a considerable drain on their physical resources. On their return journey, the caribou must face the same rivers they forged in the spring. And they need to be constantly on the alert for grizzly bears. Bears are now feeding up on berries before retreating into hibernation for the winter. But a young or sickly caribou is always a welcome addition to their diet. Autumn gives the chance, too, for smaller animals like ground squirrels to lay on fat for the winter. At this time of year, the rivers are ice-free and less dangerous for the caribou to swim. The herds are more spread out now, and it may be several weeks before the last ones have crossed here. But for the caribou, there are other hazards. For thousands of years, the native Inupiat of the Kobuk River have relied on the annual caribou migration to supply them with meat, skins, and sinews. In the 1970s, pressure from hunters seriously threatened the Western Arctic herd, and 3/4 of their number were killed as modern boats, snowmobiles, and firearms enabled hunting to become more lethal. But over the last 20 years, caribou hunting has been restricted, and the herd has slowly regained its former numbers. Many hunters still rely on the caribou migrations. They know the places where the herds are most likely to cross, but they shoot only sufficient animals to sustain their families through the winter. A small group of caribou have crossed the river at a place where the bank is steep and unstable. They scrambled to try and find a way up the cliff. If one fell and broke a bone, the injury could prove fatal. One individual takes the lead, and the others follow blindly in its path. Unable to find a safe route, the leader heads back to the river. Soon, the others follow. Now they'll try and find an easier landing place. As they travel, the groups of caribou are usually led by old females whose experience and knowledge will benefit the others. For days, the fragmented herds continue to cross the Kobuk River. In autumn, the caribou are in prime condition. The hunter will choose a large bull for the extra fat and meat it carries. It's a fortunate choice for the small females like Kulavak. A large male caribou will provide the hunter and his family with enough meat to last for several months. In the far north, nothing goes to waste. Even the caribou's cast antlers have value. Porcupines, foxes, and even the caribou themselves chew them for the phosphorus and calcium they contain. On their journey south, the caribou browse almost continuously as they travel. This time, even the largest rivers are less dangerous, and they're able to take them in their stride. Still more caribou arrive at the Kobuk River. On the southern side of the river lies a landscape quite untypical of the Arctic, a desert-like wilderness of shifting sand. In places, the Kobuk dunes rise to 100 feet and are constantly moved by the wind. The caribou's wide splayed hooves are just as well adapted for sand as for deep snow or marshy ground. But the caribou don't linger here, for there is little food. Some may, however, cross the barren sands to avoid going around them. In midsummer, these Arctic dunes can experience soaring temperatures similar to deserts near the equator. The autumn is less hot, and at this season, the caribou can cope with this strange and hostile environment. Kulavak has grown a new pair of antlers in preparation for the coming winter. Her long trek is nearly over. On the far side of the dunes lie the forests which are the beginning of the caribou's wintering grounds. The first herds reach the edge of their winter range just a few days before an early blizzard comes sweeping in from the north. Kulavak's calf has now grown a full winter coat. Although only 4 months old, it's already completed a journey of several hundred miles from its birthplace. By late autumn, the area south of the Kobuk River is again home to the western Arctic herd. Now is the caribou's mating time. As the bulls come into rut, they become increasingly active among the herds. The migration has slowed now, but as the rut progresses, the caribou drifts still further south. With the herds still on the move, the bulls are unable to stake out fixed territories for their courtship. So they spray themselves with urine as a way of advertising their presence. A bull's resulting strong odor warns rivals to keep away. The mature bulls are fighting fit. Competition for the cows is intense, and only the strongest males win the right to mate. Male caribou are sometimes injured in rutting fights. The more seriously handicapped are unlikely to survive the rigors of the coming months. The Alaskan winter begins in October. The herds have finally returned to the wintering grounds from which they set out earlier in the year. The first snows of winter already cover the land. Once again, the caribou have to dig through the snow to reach their food. After the rut, Kulavak is pregnant again. But her first calf will stay with her until the next one is born. Early next year, they'll start to head northwards for the tundra as the annual caribou migration begins again. Today, caribou are once more on the increase all over their range in the Arctic. It seems that their enormous journeys will continue to be a part of the spirit of the frozen north, a symbol of the Arctic as reliable as the annual return of the caribou themselves.
Discovery.